Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Grace Sharkey. I'm a staff writer and the co-host of the Stockout Show here at Freightwaves, also host of our SiriusXM radio show, Freightwaves Drive Time as well. And I'm really excited today because we're partnering once again with Flock Freight to discuss the trends that are defining this year's freight landscape as a whole, and also getting a sneak peek into some new research that Flock is conducting around the challenges and opportunities that shippers are preparing for, which you can watch out for next week as well. Now, joined with us, of course, is Chris Pickett, Chief Operating Officer over at Flock Freight. And Chris and I will be taking your questions throughout the whole webinar today. So at any point, feel free to submit those in the Q&A box at any time. And we'll also be sending out a link for this recording of the webinar tomorrow. So if for some reason you have to take a quick call or you want to share it with your colleagues, no worries. You'll get the on-demand recording tomorrow in your email box as well. Also, if you have any issues with technology, feel free to add that into the comment section. We'll reach out to you to try to get that working for you as well. Other than that, we might as well dive into it today as we have a full audience here with us. Chris, thank you for joining us once again to talk about the industry.
Thanks for having me, Grace. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm very excited. And let's do a really quick intro of yourself, and the role that you play at Flock Freight for those who might not have got a chance to meet you yet.
You bet. So again, Chris Pickett, Chief Operating Officer at Flock Freight. Joined the Flock team just about 3 years ago. Focused primarily on the supply side of our business, everything from end-to-end order flow to supply side compliance, quality, profitability, and overall operating performance.
I love it. So clearly a good person to have here on this webinar today to guide us not into just this new research, but to hear from what you're hearing from shippers and from others participating in supply chains today. Let's talk a little bit about exactly why this research was important to Flock Freight and what pushed you to just really survey these individuals and figure out where the industry is currently sitting.
So I just level set and set some context for folks that may not be familiar with Flock. So Flock is a freight technology service-based service provider established in 2015. We are in the business. Our mission is really enabling something called shared truckload at scale. So what is shared truckload? We would argue it's really kind of the first, new mode, surface transportation mode introduced in the last decade or so. And effectively what it is, it allows shippers to access full truckload service, right? So that's one truck, one driver, no terminal consolidation, only pay for the portion of the truck that you need. Super simple concept, super challenging to pull off, requires tech and people and investment and supply side, network density, all those things. But when it comes together, it effectively allows a shipper just another mode option to consider when making a decision on how to move a shipment that doesn't require a full truckload, right? So less than 20 pallets, 40 linear feet, 36 to 40,000 pounds. Today, if you have a shipment that doesn't require that full truck, you've got three options. Neither of them are great. Let's say you have half a truck to move. You could hold it, say, I really want those transportation unit economics that I get with full truckload. I don't have enough freight to move yet, so I'm going to put it back in inventory and wait for another half truck to show up and then move that full truckload. And you can do that. You get the best unit economics, but you're adding time. Right, so you're adding inventory carrying cost, you're adding order lead time, not great. You could ship it through the LTL hub and spoke network. It might go through kind of a volume LTL provider where it's going to hopscotch its way through a terminal consolidation network and consolidate with other shipments en route. Or you should just pay to send it full truck. And plenty of shippers are doing that, where I know I don't have a full truckload of freight to move, but it's my lowest cost option compared to my volume LTL alternative. So I'm going to send to a full truckload carrier, knowing that I'm paying to ship air. We believe that accessing shared truckload on a consistent, reliable basis just gives you more optionality, right? So the upside for that underutilized truckload shipper, maybe it's quite obvious, is, hey, I'm not going to pay to ship air, right? So there's a cost savings there. Mm-hmm. It's much more carbon efficient from a ton-mile standpoint compared to less than truckload, depending on length of haul. It's faster, gets to touch less. So that's great. Why it's great for the truckload motor carrier, effectively adds a new way to maximize the revenue yield of those fleets. Right, so at scale, it's really a way to move freight faster, pay less, carriers get to make more money. The environment wins as well, where it's effectively 20 to 40%, more carbon efficient than those two alternatives. And so, the reason of why research like this is important to Flock is as we look to really try to build awareness around effectively a new mode of transportation. Again, what makes this different than traditional partial consolidation? You may hear this story and say, hey, folks have been combining shipments for years, and that's true. But finally, what makes this different is one, we're committing to that price at the point of sale, and two, again, there's zero terminal consolidation, right? There is no hub, there is no consolidation point in LA to consolidate shipments to send them inland to Dallas or Chicago. All of it's built in the cloud using tech and a supply side network that we're very proud of. So as we think about how best to create awareness, obviously this research acts as a pulse check of, hey, in partnership with a company called Drive Research, went out and pulled 1,000 transportation decision makers, U.S. companies that range in size anywhere from 10 million to 3 billion plus in annual revenue, and basically a long set of questions trying to ascertain how did 2023 go, and what are your expectations for 2024 in terms of what mode you use, challenges you've seen, things that have gone well, things that have gone not so well, and how that may be influencing your decision making as you prepare for 2024.
Yeah, I do. Before we dive into some of this, the key expectations from the survey, I do want to say I appreciate you kind of explaining this as like a mode, right, of transportation, because it is a whole different way of thinking how you can move your products. And I especially like the fact that you brought up the carrier side of this too, because that will become a part of this conversation today. And you're absolutely right, especially in a supply chain where we've got two parties looking to maximize not only cost savings, but on the carrier side, right, try to find revenue and gain a little more on their end wherever they can. This is the perfect way of achieving that as well. So let's dive a little bit into this study too. And I want to start off with especially talking about cost in particular. I'm interested in what you've heard from with shippers when it comes to managing their budget at this time, and how that is relating to even the shipment sizes that they have coming out as well.
Yeah, man, I don't think it's news that the industry has been in a pretty nasty freight recession, arguably the last 18 months, certainly through the most of 2023. And while certainly challenging for the supply side, freight recession just also means rates are down and things were a bit easier for the demand side. And God knows they needed it after the COVID years. So 2023 was a relatively, I think, forgiving market environment for most transportation decision makers and procurement folks. Fantastic kind of positive budget variance. No one kind of blew their freight budgets in 2023 as far as we could tell. Overall performance was okay. High primary tender acceptance, decent on-time performance. So I had a pretty decent year. But I think what we saw in the survey is I think most folks assume that that's not going to last forever. Where I think most folks in terms of responding to the poll, I think over 90% of the shippers suggested they were expecting transportation budget increases or spend increases of anywhere up to 10%. And so no one's expecting through the roof market's going to suddenly flip and freight rates are twice as expensive as they were in 2023. But I think there is this expectation of as supply and demand rebalances, at least on the truckload side, and we'll start to at least see some moderate inflation over the course of 2024.
Yeah. I think a big part of that too, to be honest, is the fact that, and this is the coolest thing about e-commerce and this trend that we've seen over the last couple of years, is like that delivery time, that expectation of when goods are arriving has become part of what you're selling and being profitable. It's part of that service. It's not just what you're built or what you're creating or what you're giving to your end consumer, but are you competitive in getting it here in the time and time frame that I want compared to your other competitors in that market? And so you add that, and of course you add the fact that I completely agree, like you want to make sure that when this market flips, you've got this strong network of carriers to follow through with that for your consumers, that budget is being looked at more. And I would say, at least in the time span that I've been a part of this industry, there's increases to it. And if anything, in the past, it's like you've constantly been in conversations of when can we cut, where can we cut? But now you can be strategic and work with companies like Flock Freight and figure out different ways to maybe bring that value back in. I'm interested in the efficiency of moving these shipments. When you reach out to these shippers, again, big companies too, it looks like as well. How are they maximizing that space? And is there anything being left behind that companies like yourself can help fill?
Yeah, I think you make a good point on just how inventory strategies are shifting as we see continued digital transformation of retail. And for a lot of shippers, that means now you're carrying inventory in more places than you used to, just to facilitate, next day, 2-day delivery, or sometimes same day. And so there's absolutely a need for speed. And I think that need for speed and velocity, not just velocity, but also transit time consistency, right? Less variability. Can I consistently hit my demanding, especially retail customers that have pretty heavy, onerous OTIF penalties on time in full, when the trucks don't show up on time, right? So how do we enable that? So that, I think, narrative certainly kind of came through in terms of how folks are thinking about transportation strategy for 2024. While we kind of expected in terms of shipment sizes, right, because of that need for speed, that maybe over time you might see a reduction in shipment sizes. Right, so rather than shipping those full truckload moves from a regional distribution center to a dozen local band locations, now you've got more lanes, shorter transit, potentially higher order quantities, but smaller sizes. So I want you to ship. I want that full truckload once a week. I want a third of a truck 3 times a week. But ultimately what we heard in the research was shippers kind of reported the opposite. Where 92% of shippers recorded an increased load size, up to 10%. And so I think you definitely have some of those dynamics I mentioned before, but also I think overall inventory levels are much less constrained, right, than they were. So it sounds like shippers are taking the time to wait a little bit, as they should. Yeah. How do you balance that? And definitely heard a lot of shippers are combining themselves, right? So if they've got shipments that are moving on route, a lot of internal LTL consolidation to multi-stop truckload, which is fantastic. So shippers are certainly cognizant. No one wants to pay to ship air. It's absurd. So of course they'll do everything in their power, either through tweaking their optimization logic in their TMS, or managing their order patterns, or how they're working with with their customers to drive more consistency and predictability. But even with that, 43% of truckloads, so 43% of truckloads from the respondents in the pool are still moving at less than half capacity. But and again, despite everyone's best intentions and they're doing all the right things, but each one of these networks, there's only so far you can get doing it yourself. Doesn't matter how large you are, you're always going to be constrained by your own network, geographic dispersion, your own load consistency or inconsistency, and there's going to be a limit to how far you can get to fill out those trucks. And so I think what makes us, again, super excited about what Flock is building, and some of our early and kind of consistent customers are confirming that is, here's just another lever to pull, or if you can maximize that utilization internally, create your multi-stops yourself, fantastic, you should do that. But for the loads that you can't, or you don't want to subject yourselves to changing other inventory policies or operational parameters, leverage Flock to pull your freight with other freight moving in that same direction.
Yeah, I mean, math-wise, it's like what, 1 in every 4 trucks is running empty. And for all those out there who are shipping managers watching this, I'm sure in those days, that Friday or that day late in the afternoon, you can't find a truck, that stat right there makes you a little bit sick. And for carriers out there who've run empty, trying to find something, knowing that there's a way to eliminate that waste is huge. And a big part of what Flock is giving back, I think, to the industry is, well, in this case, reducing, is even the carbon emissions. Can you speak on the environmental impact of what that empty space is creating as well?
For sure. So, I mean, aside from the clear cost advantages of not paying to ship air, and again, for the motor carriers, it's kind of the opposite, where if the truck's half full, there's potential revenue opportunity, right, that they're not realizing. From an environmental standpoint, we look at it as a way to just move more ton miles per gallon of diesel fuel, or therefore more tons of carbon emissions. So if the trucks are fuller, basically we're looking at load factors. And so there's a challenge in the LTL space, but also in the truckload space where the load factors are less than they could be. We're using less of the available capacity. So our research suggests that when shippers are able to leverage shared truckload, we get the trucks fuller, Effectively, that means a 20% carbon emission savings compared to traditional hub and spoke less than truckload, 40% compared to underutilized truckload. Right? We're effectively taking underutilized capacity out of the market, making better use of the capacity that we have, as we're all patiently waiting for emerging technologies around alternative fuels, whether it's hydrogen, right, battery electric. I think our stance is we all want those things. We all want a carbon-free future, at least from a transportation standpoint. But there's a lot that we can do collectively in the industry just by leveraging the capacity that already exists.
Yeah, I love you use the word patiently, because that's patiently, yes, on the alternative fuels is it's going to take some time, and I think much more time than the average person would think. And I think what's interesting is there's something that we can do right now that's dropping those emissions, and that's understanding, right, this wasted space that you're showcasing, and that the best part about this, I mean, this is coming from shipper surveys. This is exactly what shippers are dealing with, and being able to make sure that not only are we filling that space, but not wasting that fuel as well.
Sure. And again, I think once these get here, once the grid is up to kind of par and all the enabling technologies are in place, we want those trucks to be full too. Don't get me wrong.
Great point.
Regardless of the powertrain, we want those trucks to be full. So ultimately, that's what we're building against. And again, shippers aren't making bad decisions. Why would you pay to ship every other truck right half empty? Our stance is it's been a lack of available alternatives. And so with shared truckload, there is now an alternative. And I think it's something to consider as you're thinking about transportation strategy from 2024 onward.
Well, and it's the visibility of the mode, right? Like, and that's why I love that you brought it up as a mode, because it's this capacity type, you could say, has always been there. It's just so hard in the past without a technology provider like yourself to find it. I mean, I've been there, and I can't tell you how many times you bring a truck in to a shipper, kind of in this shared truckload space, and they're like, oh, I didn't even consider the fact that we could be a little bit more creative with how we are moving our freight. And so I love this. And again, happy that we're kind of bringing this to light more and more and introducing shippers to this alternative mode in particular. Now, another area that you touch on in this survey is one that we cover quite frequently here at Freightwaves. I've talked to a lot of logistics providers who are dealing with these issues and walking shippers through these good old fraud and theft in this industry. Can you tell us how significant you found that fraud and theft issues are currently in the freight landscape through the survey, and what ways that we can start to mitigate this?
Yeah, but I think what was interesting about the survey results is not that fraud and theft is rampant, and it's not an emerging problem or an increasing problem for the industry, but I think a lot of the shippers were caught off guard in terms of what were the drivers, why is fraud accelerating? And I think one of the narratives or kind of the thesis is around, as the trucking industry continuously digitally transforms, right, applying new technology, especially the non-asset-based platforms, there's never been more ways for carriers to find spot freight or any freight. Go download 5 different apps and literally have access to tens of thousands of spot shipments. And it's hard to argue that's not a net good thing around just how operationally efficient those networks can get using technology as an enabler. I think one of the maybe unforeseen consequences is across these digital platforms, whether it's a social network or a U.S. spot truckload transportation network, it can become easier for bad actors to access these platforms, navigate, based on whatever they're looking for, potentially even impersonate otherwise carriers in good standing, stealing MC numbers, right, identity theft, and to the extent that these digital networks are enabling this, I think it's caught a lot of shippers somewhat by surprise. I think they reported 1 in 43 shipments, doesn't seem like a lot. So 2.3% of truckload shipments in 2023 were impacted by fraud or theft. And so I think as the industry catches up from a digital standpoint, and certainly this is front kind of burner for Flock, as we are a digital native, digital first network, is how do you invest in technologies that build trust, right? That validate identities. Shout out to Highway. Highway's been a new emerge in this market and create great tech to help in that fight. And there's plenty of other early stage and mid stage and late stage tech companies and service providers that are out there trying to do the same thing. So it's been interesting where I don't think anyone's arguing to turn back the clock on digital transformation, but it's, as we continue into this brave new world, what can shippers do? What can carriers and brokers do to mitigate this? And so, a lot of what Flock will invest in things like, two-factor authentication, certainly I mentioned highway, validating identities, really trying to turn the screws on compliance process and how do you properly vet carriers to build expectations that a certain carrier, whether they're holding a multi-stop pool or an unpooled partial or one of our truckloads, is going to be a trustworthy trading partner. This idea of, trust but verify, what are all the signals that are out there that we can verify against? I think one of the great things about the digital networks is that you can acquire an awful lot of data around just watching how different users navigate, what they're clicking on, what IP address they're logging in from. Is that the same IP address that they logged in from the last time? You can start to collect all kinds of interesting dots that I think over time, the industry is going to start plugging some of these holes and address some of these trust issues, that right now, where I continue to be a huge challenge, across the industry. And so that's the digital piece. I think also what shippers are also working through is what can they enable operationally, right? So usually the theft scenario, whether it's a full-on theft of the whole load disappears, or the truck shows up and a pallet's missing, or 2 layers are, skimmed off the top of each pallet, what else can facilities do to validate that the carrier that's showing up to pick up the shipment is the one that's supposed to pick up the shipment, either dispatched from the asset-based carrier they're working with or the non-asset. So I think where we've had the most success, especially with shippers that are not necessarily most highly exposed, but high value density products, things that are being targeted by these organized rings is, what can we do collaboratively, to share information and validate, hey, can you take a picture of the truck? Is it the MC number and the carrier that we expected to show up? Some shippers will take a photocopy of the driver's CDL, the driver's license, to validate not necessarily this is the right MC number on the truck, but it's also the right driver that we expected to pick up their shipment. So I don't think it's, while it may have been a surprise in 2023, I don't think it's a surprise to anybody at this point, and shippers are aware of it. There's a massive cost of this. It's quickly becoming kind of a top 3, at least, concern around what should they be investing in to mitigate these risks going forward.
Yeah, it's I do feel like, and I haven't been in the industry for a little over a decade now, and I do feel like in the last 5 years it's gotten so much more worse than we've seen. I think it's funny. I think through COVID, people really realize how important supply chains are, how, especially the driver experience, how important that is to our overall economy. But on the negative flip side of that, hackers and bad players out there also realized, right, that there's these trucks driving around with some really great products in there that could be taken off. So, it's interesting, especially in the shared truckload space, with sharing that space. Sometimes I think people might get concerned of, okay, is that expose me more? But it sounds like you've added all these extra, these blocks, these hurdles that they'd have to get through. What's that been like for your team implementing those and having them understand the importance of that, especially in the shared space?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the survey response was roughly 2.3% of shipments were impacted by fraud or theft. I think Flock in 2023 was closer to 0.2%. So it's not zero. We're not immune to these challenges. But I think the nature
it's a good percentage, though.
Yeah. Right, for sure. But I think something that's an offset of the model is this idea of, I'm sure I'm not the first one who said it, freight at rest is freight at risk. So anytime freight is sitting still somewhere, there's a chance for something
Very
to
true.
go wrong. Whether it's sitting in a terminal or breakable facility or in a yard somewhere. And the unique nature of Flock shared truckloads is they're very rarely at rest, right? That freight is always moving, right? That's just something that's built into the model. And so I think that plus just the increased importance of tracking, right? To think about how to make sure shared truckload work at scale. It's not just here's 2 shipments that they're roughly the same size. We can kind of put them together. Here's a great economic environmental outcome. All of that is based on transit time expectations, dwell time expectations, right? All that's built into building a reliable route that delivers in the amount of time that the carrier was led to believe was going to deliver in, when they signed on to take the shipment. So all that kind of blends into I think the investments we've made at different stages of flock where, we had to be as accurate and as disciplined as we could be, from a tracking standpoint. I think just the fact that, these loads don't stop, I think has created I think an interesting option for shippers, that either have high value density product or have become, targets for theft rings is, here's a way to leverage shared truckload that maybe has different value characteristics, relative to the other modes that I typically leverage.
Yeah, another piece of this survey as well is sticking in kind of this like risk mitigation. Of course, there's a huge risk of fraud right now in our industry, but there's also the risk of what kind of we talked about earlier is not having inventory where you need it at the most, or having warehouses depleted of that inventory, and not being able to have a partner to make sure that you can be maybe a little bit more strategic in how you're, of course, using your network of carriers and making sure that you're hitting those inventory levels as well. How do you see technology playing more of a role in the future of freight logistics and mitigating even more of just managing and planning supply chains better?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned inventory. That's, I think, one of the big, challenges, opportunities of the last several years was you had this wild COVID bulb effect. You're all of a sudden we have enough in stock, and then everyone's sheltering in place, and we bought all the stuff in the U.S., all the goods, and then once you ran out of inventory here, we bought all the stuff from overseas markets, congesting, ocean trade lanes, in the ports, and all of a sudden, COVID was resolved. Knock on wood. Consumption patterns finally shifted again. Now, holy crap, we've got too many patio sets and Pelotons and sweatpants and where that stuff just isn't needed in the same way. And so you've got this radical shift back and forth with inventory levels, and the data would suggest that shippers have no intention of building back to 2019 levels until maybe the dust clears up a little bit in terms of what consumption is going to be looking like. Obviously, we're in an interesting phase of kind of interest rate regimes. We've got an election coming up, so all these things create an awful lot of uncertainty. And you think about what inventory is. In some ways, it's safety, right? It's you having the thing there, anticipating the demand signal from one customer that it may not have shown up yet. And so if there's a way to add velocity, if there's a way to move faster, if there's a way to kind of compress time, so to speak, such that you can defer some of those decisions. Or if you've got a faster path to market, you don't need to go through necessarily a hub and spoke network to go from LA to New York, or compromise by paying to just ship air. Again, here's shared truckload. Here's a way to get almost the best of both worlds in many cases, where you get the speed of full truckload, but having the flexibility of not having to fill up that full truck, if that makes sense. So I think a lot of shippers are just looking for ways to get faster, and use it as a way to kind of replace otherwise holding on to elevated levels of inventory, which creates its own risks.
Yeah, I mean, the stock out, we cover a lot of the retailers, and especially, I mean, look at Bed Bath & Beyond. That's inventory issues is the reason that they are unfortunately no longer here. And that's, it's a company you didn't think would be dealing with that. And I think, especially you look at something like Bed Bath & Beyond, you look at more of this omni-channel experience where you have these third-party sellers, what Amazon, Walmart, some of these large retailers are doing. And that takes very creative planning for your supply chains to make sure that not only is that item in store, but when someone buys it online, it's ready to go and to ship somewhere too. So you're almost you're dealing, I think, with a much more complex supply chain, especially on the retailer CPG side as well, than you ever did in the past. And it could unfortunately be quite literally the death of you if something were to go wrong. I just want to really quick comment for our audience too. We're hitting about the halfway mark through this, so we are starting to have some questions come through in the Q&A, and we'll get to those here in a second. But make sure that you ask any questions you're looking for us to hit today. For some reason, we don't get to all of them too. Flock does get those, so they can reach out to you afterwards as well to answer those. So no such thing. Hey, I'm here. No such thing as dumb questions. I'll ask the dumb questions all day long. Those are the best ones to sometimes get answered. So make sure you throw anything in there that we can hopefully help you better understand and uncover today as well, especially having someone like Chris on with us for sure. Now, I want to dive a little bit more into these the survey, and we're getting a little bit more into the the LTL side of things in particular, right? Because I think that's where it gets even. We talk about the mode aspect, right? LTL is always looked at as a mode. I think shared is where people start to kind of measure LTL and shared shipping together. Can you elaborate on some of the hidden costs that come with LTL shipping, especially, and I think we've all had experience if you've done LTL before, the burden that comes with the claims aspect behind it as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a reason why the LTL industry has evolved the way that it has. And again, it's not bad. There's phenomenal operators in this space, and we're fortunate to have many of them as our partners.
Yeah.
But I think the challenge with scaling up that hub and spoke network is you need to have high levels of certainty around the dimensions of the freight. And so archaic rating regimes of how do you price LTL freight, some of that's going more dynamic, some it's not, that's subject to things like, reclass fees, reweigh fees. We thought it was going to be this in terms of what we transmitted to the carrier, and it turns out it was something else, and that something else resulted into something with a dollar sign. Or things like over-dimensional fees, where just, some freight is just certainly not predisposed to get handled well through that hub and spoke network. Then the other piece is damage. And it doesn't matter who you are, every time that freight gets touched by a forklift, there's a challenge for that freight to get damaged. I think most of the damage that happens en route, typically happens when that freight's getting handled, not when it's in transit. Certainly you can have shifting pallets and you can wrap the pallets effectively, and that happens. But in our experience, a lot of the damage happens when you're loading, unloading, as you transit your way through that LTL hub and spoke network. So from a survey standpoint, they across the board, folks kind of responded, average LTL damage rate about 1.9% and change, call it 2%. So we talked about 2.3% of shipments being subject to some form of fraud or theft, another 2% being subjected to damage, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it compounds. I think the impact of that, again, you'd expect the dollar cost impact depended on the size of the shipper that you were, but for that kind of $3 billion plus enterprise shipper category is in excess of $6.3 million every year in
Wow.
LTL claims. And so again, that's just a fundamental, reality of freight getting handled that way. And it's not to say the LTL network's going away. We don't propose that at all. A lot of freight should go through the regional hub and spoke, and that would be great. But certainly some freight that may be more predisposed to damage, there might be a total landed cost version of moving that, with a different mode of transportation, like shared truckload. I think for Flock, our shared truckload damage rate, again, it wasn't 0.3% for 2023 compared to an LTL industry average of 2%. So when that freight doesn't get dinged, then, hey, great, more freight shows up on time and condition, happier customers, more manageable inventory levels. But even when there are claims, I think something that comes up a lot when shippers are trying to determine, hey, I've got a standard LTL rate, then I've got a Flock shared truckload rate that's maybe $150 more, $50, whatever the number is. How do I justify that? A lot of them are just looking at the overall shipment claim exposure, right? So standard LTL insurance covers 10 cents per pound, versus if you're leveraging shared truckload, you're basically getting a proportion of that 100K cargo insurance level for that full truck. So just having more coverage, if the unforeseen bad thing does happen, your freight gets dinged up, shippers are finding value in just mitigating in that $6.3 million a year in LTL claims. It's worth making a different decision, move some of that freight via shared truckload.
Yeah, even in this discussion too, like how quickly it's being billed back to you, and talk about cash flow right now for anyone in the industry, it's so important. So like considering providing those LTL services can sometimes be rough too. And then we've wrote about this a few times as well. A lot of these providers in the LTL space are really starting to reconsider what their type of freight is. And my biggest concern is that might be companies out there that have traditionally used an LTL company that might someday say, listen, because of the density or because of the size or because of the lack of volume, you might not become as important to their overall business strategy. So again, to have another mode like shared truckload there that can especially with the technology that you guys have built and data and partnerships that you've grown over the last few years. It's a really, really great mode to turn to in that case. So
I think we saw this, a lot during the COVID buildup. Where again, I think it's, running a large nationwide, even regional asset-based LTL hub and spoke network efficiently is hard. You've got to maintain right balance, and again, the operators that are out there and thriving do a really, really good job of that. And so I think to do that, you've got to regulate what freight makes it into your network. And pre-COVID, maybe someone's LTL rates were good up until 16 linear feet. And all of a sudden, those LTL networks got overcome, oversubscribed, and all of a sudden that came down to 12 feet, and then to 10 feet, then to 8 feet. Where if your freight was longer than that or challenging to handle, then that wasn't going to be a great mode for you. And so I think some of that's come back, where I think those networks are under maybe a little bit less stress. You're seeing that modulate maybe back in the other direction. But I think all we're trying to do is, again, create another option, allow shippers to make informed decisions. And now knowing that you've got that alternative right there between LTL and FTL, the optimal, may look a little bit different than it did before.
Yeah, it's this is a good discussion. I'm really excited that you brought up, especially those points there, because it is interesting to bring up the changes in the LTL space, and but positively also consider, right, that there is a whole other type of again, mode and provider out there that's going to be able to help out with those changes too.
And again, for us, like I said, we talked about the LTL providers being great partners, and we sell a standard LTL product, and again, there are conversations we'll have around other ways to go to market together, where we know you guys don't want that over 14-foot freight. That's what we love. Ultimately, our network works really well for 10 to 40 linear feet, 5 to 20 pallets. If that's freight that's more challenging across that environment, is there a way to work together? And again, go to market to provide greater value for their installed customer base. So I guess the point is, it's not an either or. I think proposition here, it's an and.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, that's the coolest thing about providing logistics specialties in this industry, is it's like people. I was just talking to someone outside the industry earlier today, and it's like, well, it depends weather, it depends on timeline, it depends on product type, it depends on spacing, it depends in the shared space, right? How much weight is even already on the truck? There's so many questions that go into that type of logistics. So to have both offerings is important as well. Both have definitely a need in this space. And I want to ask you a little bit more into the challenges that you saw and that we pulled out of this survey. And for everyone out there too, this is going to become available to those, all of you, it sounds like later next week too. Freightwaves and Flock will keep you updated on that, so you can get your hands on that as well. So I wanted to give you all a nice preview of what that looks like. But reviewing what shippers responded and discussing some of these challenges, how do you suggest shippers can better prepare themselves for the challenges that you see upcoming this year in particular?
I think the name of the game is build optionality. And I think one of the challenges is, that's why you see, I think everyone expects freight rates to, across all modes, to increase to some level. It hasn't happened yet, clearly, but we think it's coming. It's, if you're managing a budget in 2024 and you believe, right, that the market's headed higher, but you just did a bid and all your rates went down by 5%, how do you balance those two facts and, take that contract rate reduction upstream to your CFO and say, well, we just got our bid back, we're showing a 10% savings, but I actually want to increase my freight budget by 5%. And you're going to have a hard time squaring those two things. So I think for shippers, I think just preparing your supply chain, take the opportunities now while you've got them. If your contract providers are showing you a 5% contract rate reduction in 2024, you should take that. But I think also build kind of the ability and that optionality around, again, considering all the modes you have access to. And I would carry that to intermodal. Typically when trucking gets tight, and we're expecting, again, this is going to happen at some point, to what extent and when does it happen? There's plenty of opinions on it, but eventually, supply is going to exit the market at a rate that's going to exceed the demand for it. Truck rates are going to surge to some level. And typically when that happens, alternate modes get more attractive, right, by comparison. Intermodal is one. We believe, shared truckload's a great one. You would talk about, why would you pay to ship air? in 2023 and even, first quarter of 24, the penalty for shipping air was pretty benign, right? Given where truckload spot rates were, and still are. As the penalty cost for shipping air goes up, right, those other modes that you could consider become more attractive, by comparison. And so I think the challenge is just building the operational flexibility such that, when these challenges or opportunities kind of occur from a market standpoint, that you've got the right organization, you've got the right technology, you've got the right transportation partners to be able to react just one step faster than your competition. And if you can do that, then then you win. So it's kind of, how do you prepare for this future that's not here yet, but every version of past history suggests that things are going to get a little more challenging. And what can you do now to put yourself in the best position to create the best outcomes?
Yeah. This kind of wraps into a question that we do have. So from Carlos Valdez, thank you for throwing a question in there. For others, feel free to throw some in the Q&A here. Yes, what's the ideal lead time for scheduling sharing a truck with another shipper? And I kind of want to expand that too into like maybe best practices for using this mode, right? And being able to prepare your operations to best utilize shared truckload.
Yeah, I mean, shippers have been trying to co-load for years, and in a past life, worked with plenty of shippers. We call it horizontal collaboration, where I'm two CPG shippers that are both delivering into the same Walgreens DC. I'm making up names, and they're shipping half trucks, every other day. Rather than pay to ship air, can they coordinate planning schedules and instead, co-load and deliver that full truck to the same DC? And that's a fantastic thing. It's a great idea. But the challenge that we always ran into, it's because of this, it's really hard to harmonize, shipping patterns, pickup and delivery schedules, even quantities. All of a sudden, that second load is 3 pallets short. The cost economics change. Who bears the burden of that? And so I think the short answer is, Flock manages that. And so I think what makes Flock unique in terms of, there's really two important pieces of enabling technology. One is probably kind of obvious, you think about this model, is the route planning and the solvers. We're taking all the shipments that could be combined, and again, it's permutation math in terms of different combinations and sequences. Today, looking at the freight that we're moving this week, there are 120 trillion combinations by which that freight could be paired together to execute. The majority of which are infeasible, right, because of geography or hours of service or appointment delivery times. It's one important thing to note when we're building our multi-stops. It's all based on pickup and delivery sequence. Right, so everything is loaded last in, first out. Right, the idea of it's truckload service, that means your freight gets touched twice. Once loaded, once offloaded, never gets reworked on someone else's dock. So when we're building our patterns and our routes and our permutations, we have to keep that hard constraint in mind. And so of our 120 trillion potential solutions, we winnow it down to say 500,000 that could work, and then we keep solving every 90 seconds as new freight comes on board to see, is there a better solution to create better service outcomes for everybody involved? And so the short answer is, I think ideal, it's anytime we're ever to go out and source capacity to move these shipments, it's 36 hours is probably ideal, maybe 48 hours. Same day is challenged because that just compresses the time to go out and find the right complementary sized Tetris piece, then to go match with the right truck. Once we create optimal multi-stop pools, we're still going out to our network and finding either an empty truck that can handle our 2-pick, 2-drop shared truckload shipment, or potentially a truck that's loaded half full that has room for more. And so I think that same kind of logic prevails around the sooner the better, but it's typically 48-ish hours is fine, as long as we can efficiently get appointments and then continue those loads through the routing and scheduling process. But I think the moral of the story is the shipper doesn't need to care about that. Right, the shipper's going to say, I've got half truckload of stuff, and I want you to pick up Tuesday at 8 a.m. You deliver Thursday at 8:30 a.m. Here's the price, live load. I guess I should explain. There are certainly constraints across Flock's network, right? To make the platform work, you need scale and density, the two most important things. And so the tech is, of course, super important. Our people are super important. Our carrier partners are super important. But having enough of the right size Tetris pieces on platform at the right time, is also super important in terms of us being able to actually solve for this. So to be able to do this, the ways you reduce complexity is, today it's a drive-in only network, right? There's no reason to believe those reefer trailers are any better at driving utilization. But in terms of where we are with Flock, it's lower 48, so we'll give you a rate anywhere in lower 48, domestic U.S. But it is drive-in only for now. Eventually, we'll get to refrigerated and flatbed and domestic intermodal and on down the line. But no cross-border. And right now, it's for the most part live. Right, we certainly have had use cases where we can drop equipment, but that can be a little challenging, as for all the reasons you might expect. We're potentially trying to pool on either side. Not impossible, but challenging. And so that's how we manage the complexity. But at the end of the day, the shipper says, "I've got my stuff. It's going to work in a drive-in. What's your rate? Okay, pick up delivery on time. Okay, great." And it's our responsibility to do all the math and pull all the levers and run through those 120 trillion potential permutations to find the right one that's going to create the best outcome for your half truck shipment.
Well, it's interesting too, that question. You also kind of dove into the next area I want to get into, which is the technology, right? Flock Direct in particular. And interesting as you see the findings within the study, how is Flock Direct, and you kind of named a few here just now, but how does it propose to address some of those issues that came back in the study for shippers as well?
In terms of the, sorry, I'm skipping ahead to the.
No. Yeah. In terms of, I think like probably reducing costs and even more so reducing that waste of space that they might be, or waste of capacity.
Right. So enabling, hey, how do I create optionality, right, for a potentially challenging supply chain environment that's not here yet? How do I build that optionality? We think shared truckload is a great way to do that. So a lot of the conversations we're having now, we'll look at our shared truckload rates versus their next best alternatives. And hey, it looks great here, but maybe here, our truckload rates are still 20% lower than they were, 2 years ago. And as Flock builds out scale, sometimes shared truckload is only less expensive, up to say 36 linear feet, versus 40. But we believe that again, that cost the ship air is only going to go higher. And so hey, let's get a pilot going. Let's think about, can you have dimensions available at the point of quoting and tendering? Let's get an EDI or an API integration. Again, how do we think about starting to expose shared truckload as a mode across more of your platforms, such that when the relative comparisons change, it becomes that much easier to pull the shared truckload lever to drive savings outcomes. And so that's just the pure cost savings. I think the damage less, stolen less, more likely to arrive in one piece, that's never going to go out of style. And so again, shippers that are having challenges there, shared truckload's a great alternative today. And then of course the environmental impact, right? Again, Flock is a B Corp, the only B Corp in transportation we know of, predicated on the mission of reducing unnecessary carbon tailpipe emissions. And so depending on your sustainability goals, here's a way, again, as we're all patiently waiting for more carbon friendly core capacity and kind of means of transportation, then hey, here's a way to, just by shipping smarter, creates a carbon benefit that you can count towards your scope 3 for sure.
Yeah, we have some other great questions here in the Q&A, so feel free to put those in there. We've got a good about 10-ish minutes left here. I love this question from Matthew Brady out there. How does Flock see the future in terms of shipper scheduled multi-stop routing trucks versus leveraging wide open networks that let things kind of just pair out naturally? How do you see that shared truckload experience growing as your technology improves?
That's a fantastic question. And that's one that we're working with a lot of enterprise shippers, that have, very sophisticated, TMS optimization, functionality today, where, ultimately as they're going through the point of planning, right? Today you've got kind of here's all the orders, and I'm going to decide mode and then carrier. And you've kind of got really two, but call it 2.5 lanes. You've got, here's my LTL rate. Let's say I've got a half truck shipment, or let's say a 4-pallet shipment. It's coming down the pipe. I'm going to decide, should it go LTL or truckload? There's a lot of platforms that today still use a pretty crude heuristic. If it's under 28 feet, kick it down the LTL lane. If it's over 28 feet, kick it down the truckload lane. We're saying, no, don't do that. Let's look at all the rates you have access to. And so, again, let's pretend it's a 4-pallet shipment, 8 linear feet. I know what my LTL rate's going to be. I know, primary carrier, my truckload routing guide, I know what that rate is. If I can identify, and again, a lot of shippers can't do this, but some can, other smaller shipments that are going in the same direction, I can run a multi-stop analysis myself and say, here's my truckload rate, with the extra stop charge. I can jam these two shipments together and move it to lower cost versus shipping both LTL or shipping both individually, right, truckload. And you should do that. I think we're working again with a lot of those shippers, and actually the enterprise TMS providers themselves is, how do you insert shared truckload into that heuristic such that, okay, you can do your multi-stop, but we believe those multi-stops aren't full either. And so, yeah, you combine them together, cheaper than your alternatives, but it's still only 16 feet of space in the trailer. It's optimal in terms of there was no more cost-effective solution in the constraints of Euro network, but we'd love to pool those. We'll do your multi-stops, then also find another shipment that we can pool on the back, or that can be on the nose when it shows up to pick up. And so I think it's an ongoing conversation. Ultimately, shippers will decide based on, as it always is, the combination of service levels and cost. And I think just by adding that shared truckload, again, conduit into driving those calculations of, here's your in-house multi-stop rate for the shipment. Here's a poolable multi-stop rate. Then how do we, again, provide exposure to shared truckload rates into that optimization heuristic on the front end to get this at the point of planning? Because ultimately that's where we see this going. Is we believe that not only shouldn't be 2.5 lanes, it should be 3.5 lanes, where every shipment should find the most cost-effective means of transportation, given all the options you have access to, of which we believe shared truckload can be an increasingly important one.
Well, and to kind of touch on the growing as technology improves, I can't tell you how many management systems I've seen that aren't built for the shared mode. Like you lightly touched on. Yeah, I didn't want to throw them all out there, but
we're now, right?
I remember using one in particular where I'm like, why are you acting like this is a full truck? It's not, and it's just like like you said, they pick a dimension. Not all of them pick the same ones, and that when you're talking about consolidating and getting a better picture of what's available out there, those are like the small things I think that people don't understand is of stopping someone like Flock from seeing the full picture of what shipments are out there. So I just get excited as we see even management systems become more aware of this mode in particular and how they're building against it. That gets me excited as a whole. So again, great question from Matthew. We got another one here from Will Caffrey. Does Flock optimize routing for shared truckload to account for deadhead, revenue, etc.?
Yeah, I'd say we account for all of it, right? So whether it's deadhead, the route is very important, as you might imagine. Expected dwell times are very important. The utilization of the truck is very important. Should we look to let this 2-pick 2-drop go, or do we want to hold it to try to find another pallet or two to really maximize utilization? All that's has probability models that are built on top. Where ultimately, for this model to work, it's got to provide value for a shipper, right? So shared truckload has got to be better than the next best alternative, and especially if we're considering truckload, a lot of that's based on cost. For a motor carrier, we haven't talked much about them. We've got to win their hearts and minds too, right? Yeah. So we've got to go out and demonstrate that Flock multi-stops aren't the same multi-stops that you're used to, right? Because a lot of the multi-stops we're used to suck, right? Because they're badly put together. They break. You thought you signed up for a 3-day route, it ends up being a 4-day route, and you didn't get paid that labor to make yourself whole. I'll never do that again. So a lot of how we've gone about building our network is, we need to win the hearts and minds and really dazzle our shippers with this other alternative. But it's the same thing on the carrier side, right? Carrier's only going to sign up to do that extra stop if it's in their best interest. And a lot of that is first and foremost based on how much money can I make from a per mile and also a unit of time standpoint, shipping a Flock 2-pick 2-drop or 3-pick 3-drop shared truckload, given my next best alternatives. Where can I go to maximize the revenue yield of my fleet, given all the other constraints I'm trying to solve against? And so, for that to work, the money's got to work, the dwell times have to work, ultimately the reliability has to work, right? So there's got to be fidelity in that route that motor carrier is looking at to decide, is this the best choice for this asset and this driver this week versus everything else I could go take? And the better we do at closing the gap between expectation and reality, right, the more likely we are to build trust and for those carriers to come back. And so, what's built into the model, all that's built in the model, revenue, deadhead, dwell times, again, trying to build our best prediction of how that load plan is actually going to unfold once it gets out in the wild, where transportation can get, messy, such that again, building reliability for the shipper, that are considering a new thing, right? Considering a new thing in a market that doesn't have many new things is tough. And there's a high burden, and rightfully so, that we need to get over to win that trust. And it's the same thing on the supply side of the marketplace. We're out trying to create better revenue alternatives and outcomes for for the motor carriers that are out there, powering the U.S. economy.
Yeah, it's something I was thinking about for a second, bringing it up when you're talking about the scheduled multi-stop routing as well. I think that same discussion of what's best for the carriers available in those lanes that you might be running, or those locations that you're dropping as well. The carriers situation goes into that discussion too. So right. Again, the more data that someone like Flock can get into their hands on where that capacity is, those trends, but even the trends of those shipping lanes as well, it just explodes. And that's why I'm so excited to continue to watch your growth and see how much the shared experience grows in your hands as well. We have a few minutes here. Chris, is there anything that you want to leave with the audience today? Again, it sounds like we're going to have this out next week, so we'll keep you updated here at Freightwaves and Flock too, so you can check out this survey as well. But any last minute thoughts you want to leave the audience with?
I think just knowing that shared truckload at scale in a reliable fashion is here, right? So we're already scaling. This isn't we're not trying to build proof of concept, and this is trying to find right product market fit, right? It's there. Capacity is building in, network coverage is building in, and with that comes price competitiveness, right? It's almost think about this reinforcing feedback loop where the more freight we have to compare to combining with your shipment, so we get our 120 trillion in first, different alternative to consider in terms of routing, the discount to the truckload rate only goes up, right? So the more likely we are to find a companion shipment, right, the more attractive that Flock shared truckload rate is going to be relative to your truckload alternative. The more attractive that is, the more likely, shared truckload is to be the right choice. Now that load comes on platform, all of a sudden now we have more options, right, for motor carriers to consider, where they're more likely to come back, which over time is going to, create better outcomes for them. And you build, this momentum and this reinforcing feedback loop, service improves, cost improves, overall performance improves, and the impact we can have on, certainly, shippers, right, spending less, experiencing, less damage, less theft, experience for the carriers, getting paid more based on their available revenue generating capacity, and the benefit for the environment in terms of making every bit of best use out of the carbon emitting capacity that exists on the roads. We're super excited on where this goes from here. But I think the point is shared truck was an option right up there with LTL and FTL. Think about including it in your next bid. Think about including it as an option to consider. It's here, it's real. Don't pay to ship air if you don't have to.
Exactly. Perfect point to leave off on. And for everyone, of course, watching today, thank you so much for participating. For everyone in their Q&A as well. Remember, if you did sign up for this and register for this tomorrow, you should see an email from Freightwaves with an on-demand link to watch this over again. Feel free to, of course, share with others in your company. And if you have any questions, reach out to Flock as well to get those answered. Chris, thank you again so much for sharing your insights with us. And we hope you all join us again soon for another Freightwaves webinar.
Thanks for having me, Grace. Can't wait.